Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And as things tend to go on this sort of mission that I'm on, I tend to vacillate between my elders, people that came before me on the bandstand, and then my peer group. People that are looking to be authentically creative in all genres of music. And I've had a chance during this pandemic and sort of this pause to interview a really fantastic drummer and a great cat, Aaron Spursky. And he grew up, dwelling on, hanging out with his friends, but dwelling with the great Warren Marsh, a very angular, unique player. And so even though Spursky's not necessarily a jazzer per se, he definitely tries to incorporate those aesthetics into whatever music he's playing. And he was like, hey, man, you might want to be hip to my mom's husband. He's a pretty decorated drummer. And sure enough, I was looking this cat up, and he's really had quite a remarkable career in a music that was born in this country, but quite frankly has never been supported in this country. It's really one of those things that continues to vex me, although I do understand that it has something to do with the color of skin and the fact that, there's a lot of reasons, but the bottom line is that the music that he has been responsible for and helped create has been consumed much more in Europe and in Japan, and appreciated over there than it ever has in the United States of America. That being said, he's had many transcendent bandstand experiences with really the masters of this music. What an honor. Tim Pleasant, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh. Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
You know, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this voice in for you. Take a listen to the content, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
Well, the club, I think they owed Mingus about a couple $1,000, and they didn't have it or didn't pay him for whatever reason. And it was kind of like The Sopranos. I mean, these guys might have been, everything you it was like looking at a movie.
A Tony Soprano, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's very possible that they were all of that. And but anyway, Mingus, upon hearing that the money wasn't available, he became enraged and actually started destroying this very nice, expensive piano.
But how did he destroy it specifically?
Well, he actually, Mingus was big. He weighed 300 pounds. He was probably 5'11" or something like that. And he was, at that time, I think he was early 40s. So he was strong and enraged, and he proceeded to go inside of the piano and pull the strings out.
That is so...
Yeah, which is incredible.
That's incredible.
That's a tremendous amount of pressure on piano strings. In fact, years ago they used to show how strong piano strings were by lifting locomotives up with them. So anyway, he plucked them out, and I thought that this was going to be everybody. We'd all get killed.
Exactly.
With this, and then being the kind of club that this was, and instead, I think they were so awestruck that somebody would be that out of control, and that they actually just sort of looked at it happen and realized that this guy was maybe crazier than they were.
Right. Tim Pleasant, you want to take a guess at who that is?
Oh man, I
would never play anyone for you that you didn't create with. So that it's somebody you've played with.
Oh my God. Well, I'm trying to think of associations with Mingus and maybe Jackie Byard.
Well, Jackie left this planet before I started my show. That was I started 10 years ago. I started my show. One of my first interviews was with this cat, and he dropped that story. That was Charles McPherson.
Oh, yeah.
And
well,
Go ahead.
I've had a couple of associations with Charles. I was never part of his regular band. However, I did have like one gig like years ago, maybe 25 years ago in Ireland, and then maybe one in California. But honestly, I haven't seen or spoke to him in quite a long time. But that's an amazing story.
Well, what I wanted to, because so just to fill it in, I didn't let him finish the story, but then, so once the Mafia cats were like freaked out by Mingus, then they left him alone, and then Dolphy sat down at a table and said, by the way, Charles, I'm leaving the band. Like, I'm going to go out on my own. And Mingus is like, I'm going to kill you. Yeah. I'm going to kill you. And so he challenged him to a knife fight. And they obviously,
oh, man.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is this, man, like, you really came up at a time when vocabulary in improvisational music was still growing. And a lot of the clubs and a lot of the venues that people, not only did you have audiences to play to, but the venues themselves were really run by the Mafia. Without the Sicilians, there'd be no jazz in America. And I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about, the ability for you to develop your own sound on the bandstand, because there were just so many places to play. And quite honestly, it was just much more hip culturally when you were really coming up.
Well, I being from Chicago, I started, as a teenager, and I got together with a couple of buddies, and we were, playing at each other's homes, garages, or whatever. But being from the South Side, and this is like in the '60s, it was a time when gangs were happening. I was like the South Side of Chicago, and my parents, I wanted to go, downtown and to other parts of the city to hear these great bands. Of course, I was too young to get in, but I could just as easily sit outside and listen in the window. But
sure,
my parents were pretty protective, so I just didn't. I missed out on like early associations with like jazz musicians. Then I went to college in Iowa, and I had some associations with some good musicians there. But it wasn't until I moved to Minneapolis with a couple of buddies, and we had an original band where I started to interface with other musicians, whether they were residents of Minneapolis or St. Paul and have since moved on to become, mainstream musician, in the jazz community, or, people that were coming in from New York, and, just getting an idea outside of my own little world, what it was like to play like just the musicianship and such. And then I moved to New York, and then wanting to really get the full influence of the energy in the city. And that's where I really learned, where I stood in terms of my proficiency and what I could aspire to. I think I moved in 1978. And that was during the Loft period. Do you remember the Loft period?
Well, actually, I was. What's funny is I was born in '78. But the thing is that, so I mean, this is all. I specifically didn't give you a lot of information because I just wanted to go as fresh as possible.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm doing this. This is not about preservation. This is about promotion of how real music is made. So I would imagine.
Oh yeah. You
were playing with. Or maybe you got a chance to play with Bobby Lyle or Hubert Eaves and those cats?
I haven't. I mean, they were around, and I was certainly around. But it's this whole thing with connections and like putting yourself out there, being in just going wherever you can just to make connections, whether they're jam sessions, going to gigs, and just having the courage to step up to great musicians and say, hey, I'm in town. I'm a new drummer. I would appreciate any advice you would have to give me. But getting back to the loft thing, it was basically a scene where, there would be a space, whether it's on the second floor, third floor, and instead of having, tables and chairs, there were just like couches, and it was kind of like a scene where there were great bands, and you would just kind of be lounging on the couch. You could bring your own wine or beer or whatever, and it was a great environment to just kind of relax and hear jazz. But basically, I didn't connect as well as I would have liked to during my period in New York, which was about 21 years. However, I did have some fantastic opportunities. I had,
I want to ask you something because you're hitting it on. I was just bringing up Hubert Eaves and Bobby Lyle because those guys were like Minnesota, stalwarts.
Oh yeah.
But no, here's the thing.
They were gone.
I want to read this to you and then have you riff on it because I'm a Long Island cat and I grew up going to my grandparents' house on the Lower West Side in the 80s and 90s. But this is what when I interviewed Hubert Eaves, he told me, and I just want you to riff on this because it leads into the loft scene because I'm sure, I don't know when the last time you were in New York, but it's kind of gotten like, it's like the Disneyland of New York now, it's like been gentrified.
Oh yeah.
And so.
Well, I was there 2 years ago.
So so this is what he said when he moved to New York, I guess around 73, a couple years before you got there. He said, "When I got to New York, everything was drab. Everything from clothing to the colors of the streets. That's the way I saw it. So you could be sitting on a subway and sitting next to a major star and never know it." And I wanted you to talk about the colors of New York City, and I don't really, okay, so be it. You didn't wind up becoming a mainstay in New York, but to me, it had everything to do, you used the word earlier, something about imagery, everything related to this melting pot of incredible esoteric music. The loft scene was one of them, but it had nothing.
Yeah.
Today, all the culture's been pushed off the street. All the culture's been pushed away. You go to the birthplace of jazz, one of them in Harlem. It's basically, upper middle class, different types of people, but they've pushed all the cultural heritage off the street. And you still were able to taste that. So can you share like a story or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what was it? 54th Street? There was a street.
52nd Street, yeah.
My memory is
52nd.
52nd Street. Yep. I was there when 52nd Street was kind of on its last leg.
Exactly.
I remember seeing photos, in the heyday of just Monk and Train, on 52nd Street, blah, blah, blah. And when I kind of, just walked up and down or rode my bicycle up and down the street, there were still... I'm not remembering the names of the clubs, but what was left, it was still kind of there. And I had the chance to play in one space, but, it didn't seem like more than a couple of years ago that all of that was just kind of like blown away. And, now like there are skyscrapers and such. But, I did capture some of the flavor because the cats that I did meet who were able to experience that culture of 52nd Street were still kind of around. They were much older than me, but I would get the essence of life on 52nd Street.
Who were these cats? Who were some of these cats? Who were some of them?
Oh man, they were guys that maybe a lot of people wouldn't even know.
Jake Feinberg would know them.
Well, this one friend of mine, actually, I was employed by him. His name was Pepe Morielli.
Wow. And, I don't know that cat.
Sicilian guy from, huh?
I love this dude. I've never heard of that cat.
Oh, well, he was director of for Carol Channing, but he was a great jazz. He was director of music for Carol Channing, so I guess that's how he made his bread. But long after that association with her, he was just a player that would play speaking of Long Island, he would play, old places in the Hamptons, and in particular, what's the town? Sorry that I can't remember.
No, I know what you're. It was like
furthest on the South Shore.
Yeah,
Like the very end.
I know exactly. A lot of Billy Mitchell used to play out there all the time. I can't remember the name of the club. Yeah.
But anyway, I would have a summer gig with him out there on a bass player, and we would, just play in the lounge, and he's playing tunes, and his favorite pianist was Teddy Wilson, and I learned a lot from him, and he was just telling me like his years, like floating around 52nd Street, like the Cats did. They would, on their breaks, they would go and hear another band, while they're playing, and then I got the sense that that's how everyone learned. They would go to each other's gig, listen to them play, sit in, and just like an amazing thing. But when I was there, that was starting to feather away. But I was just a frequent attendee of the Vanguard and I don't know, like 7th Avenue South.
Oh my God, that was the Brecker Brothers Club right there. Yeah, dude, you were. Brothers. I'm telling you, the late '70s, there was still. They definitely were.
It's still happening.
It was still cooking, It was, especially. I just, I guess I was like thinking that that you were, David Murray. Did you get a chance to hang with Murray at all?
Oh, I did. I think I actually may have even done a gig with him. I played with Frank Lowe.
Sure.
Recorded with a couple of records with him. In fact, he was the first cat that I met when I moved to New York. I had like some cassette tapes, and I had gotten his number from a friend that was a downbeat writer who was unfortunately since passed away. But I just called Frank and I said, Frank, friend of this cat that gave me a number, he invited me over to his place and he played it, and he liked it and all, and then he just needed a drummer for his I think he was going on a tour, it was a tour to Italy and London, which he hired me to play that. But it wasn't a long association, but
no, it's fine. This is what when I interviewed him, he said, when I came to New York, the whole loft jazz thing was going on, and that was a split dichotomy between the bebop cats and the out cats. I was one who always straddled the line. Through playing with Bobby Bradford, I made sure to learn both sides, and that's what's given me a little longevity. That's the point, is that can you even talk about, I'm fascinated with the loft scene because it's not something I'm totally hip to. I haven't studied all the music, but it seems to me like it allowed people that didn't necessarily know the Great American Songbook or couldn't play bebop tunes, but they had their own sort of out jazz. Can you talk about that fissure, and if you actually straddled both lines, the more bop purist side and the more outside?
Well, I think the loft scene was, I first heard about it in the early 70s. I was, where was that? I went to school in Iowa City. So I was in Iowa City through 75, and then Minneapolis through 75 to 78. But I had been hearing about the loft scene since the early 70s, just by reading Downbeat or whatever. But my experience when I got to New York and like 23rd Street, I forget the name. I can't remember
it's
the
okay.
names of
it's fine.
Places, but I in my opinion, it was a much looser scene, as opposed to going to the Vanguard, where like very established,
right.
musicians were playing, and they were playing their music. But what I experienced the loft scene is just hearing cats that, were like locals, and they were maybe, sidemen with, maybe Blakey or whoever, Elvin Jones. But I didn't hear Blakey or Elvin Jones there. I heard these other cats bands.
And you were playing
this
traps. And you were playing traps, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I love this. I love it.
You know, and they were, you know, like it was stretching out, and they had a chance to develop their own scene, you know, like their own compositions, style of playing. And, you know, whether it was like more on the free side or just kind of straight ahead or like the post bop. But talking about straddling both sides, what that means to me is like, you know, playing like kind of the traditional, not traditional like back in the 30s jazz, but like, you know, like bebop.
Absolutely.
Bebop
Absolutely.
And post bop. And then, you know, really going to like the free jazz side or like, to me, Frank Lowe was definitely like avant-garde, but in some senses, like he had like a structure, and well, to me, like free music has structure, but the music that I played with Frankie had a definite head, and you would improvise around that head, but you weren't boxed in with like, you know, like 32 bar choruses, that kind of thing. So, and before I got to New York, like my buddies and I that like, you know, playing in college in the band room and then, you know, playing at our band house in Minneapolis, we were doing everything from fusion, you know, to learning pop songs, and then just, you know, like playing free stuff, you know, the way we thought it should be played, because we listened to a lot of that. And when I did get to New York and I had a chance to play with Frank, I'm glad that I did a lot of listening, you know, like David Murray.
Well, no, I want to get your opinion on this, because this is really important. He said, in free music, the drums became a mosaic of different sound patterns, almost like waves in the ocean or sound sketches. Some musicians can't play bebop, but there are musicians that can play in a sound sketch kind of idea. It allowed a lot of, this is more the loft scene, it allowed a lot of people who wouldn't have been able to play bebop to actually get on the stage and play. As a result, a lot of charlatans got up there who didn't really know their horn or their instrument. And then there were guys who couldn't swing, and then Anthony Braxton came along and he allowed a lot of people who sounded like him to come in who couldn't actually make the attack or rhythmic impetus. You know, I mean, there's no right or wrong answers on the Jake Feinberg show, Tim. To me, like, the bottom line is you had the experience, much like David Murray did with Bobby Bradford and John Carter and Horace Tapscott, to experience. I mean, I think that's what jazz means to me. Jazz means freedom. That's why my show is, it's unbridled freedom. It's unbridled. And to me, it was intoxicating. Can you talk about, ultimately, like how you found your own individual sound, no matter what the setting, no matter what kind of music, how you were able to keep time and then as well, be able to play melodically as well?
Wow, that's a lot. What I'm going to do is just tell you.
Go where you want to go.
You know, what I from the beginnings of deciding that I was a jazz drummer and how these influences just kind of molded me into what I am now. And right now, it could change. But I'll just start from what I would consider my style of playing, which was, I was heavily influenced by Tony Williams and Elvin and Jack DeJohnette and like all cats of the day. So when I got to New York, I was ready to like start bashing. We call it bashing.
I did. Yeah.
Balls out, if that's okay to say.
Oh yeah. No, I mean also I just want to be clear, the time that you were digging into Elvin, Tony, we're talking like mid to late 60s, that mid to late 60s records,
well,
right?
Yeah, the Miles Davis association with Tony Williams, and like along with that, like Art Blakey, a totally different drummer.
Totally.
But I was heavily influenced by Tony, and then Alphonse Mizan. Does that ring a bell?
Dude, I interviewed. I'll send you my interview with him. What a rest in peace, man. What a badass.
Oh yeah, great. Well, that's what I was aiming for, and like this is just a time, date, whatever progression from like the '70s
Sure.
to like now. Like I said, I hooked up with Frank Lowe, so I got like an education to what it's like to play, in that genre, and I learned a lot too about like volume, because I figured like, the harder, louder I played, the better. But Frank sat me down and said, listen, man, your energy, you can have energy without blowing everybody's ears out, and drowning everybody out.
I love it, dude. I love it.
You can play soft and still have that energy. Dennis Charles, he was like a drummer that played with Frank a lot, and he was in that whole scene with, the free playing, the avant-garde scene. And I would watch him, and like he's going and so creative, but his volume never reached, like buried everyone else. And that's one of the things I learned through the years, is that if you can't play, if you play and you can't hear like the bass player or the horn player or the piano player, then you're playing too loud, so you're in a supportive role a lot of the times, and the band has to work together, in other words.
Well, you're talking about dynamics. You're talking about serious dynamics. Yeah.
Dynamics. So I learned a lot about dynamics working with Frank. But here comes my association with Warren Marsh, or the Lenny Tristano scene. At the same time I was playing with Frank, I met a trumpet player and a singer by the name of Simon Wettenhall, and at the time he was hanging with great singer Judy Niemak, who I believe is living in either Germany or France now. But they were students of Warren's, and Simon, the trumpet player, got my name from a friend in Minneapolis. Oh, but anyway, so I'm talking about my association with Lenny the Tristano scene. And I kind of got involved in that through meeting this trumpet player, Simon, and his partner, Judy. And I would go to jam sessions and meet other players that studied with Lenny or studied with Warren. But when I started playing, I was doing this whole Tony Williams thing, and it just didn't fit.
Right.
So I just started scratching my head, because I didn't know who Warren Marsh or Lenny Tristano was at the time. But I realized that there was this, getting back to dynamics again, most of those bass players were playing gut strings and no amp.
Absolutely.
So they were getting a nice strong sound, but and they could if they had to play at a certain volume so they could be heard without an amp, they could do it. But I realized, man, I'm just playing too loud and I can't hear them, so I have to like bring it down. And that's when I started to put two and two together, like, what Frank was telling me. You can kind of create that energy at a lower volume. And at the same time, I was kind of realizing how it fit in with like a vocalist, because I was also playing with a lot of vocalists that studied with Warren or Sal Mosca as well. He was a student of Lenny Tristano. And I don't know, I just grew to appreciate, like dynamics. And,
well, I spent most of my show talking to guys like, Mike Mainieri and people like that, who literally, they'd be like on tour with Buddy Rich, and, there'd be most of the stuff was not amplified. I mean, they were not amplified.
No.
And so your ears were huge. And that's the issue today in modern music, is that in the studio or in a live setting, is that I don't hear any dynamics. When I interviewed Bernard Purdy, he said it's out of the question if you're not playing with dynamics. All the hits that he made
Oh yeah.
came from that. And I don't hear that in modern day pop music. And I don't hear a lot of
Oh
it,
no.
and that's one reason I want to do my show is because it's that burning energy. It doesn't mean you have to bash. Like, I mean, Elvin,
Exactly.
somehow he did it so tastefully. You know, I mean, it was never like, oh, he's being obnoxious. It was just like burning. But he's like,
Well,
you know, I mean, there's an ability to play with quiet fire, you know?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I had the opportunity to hear Elvin a couple of times live, and I mean, his energy, which drove the band. The band members had to come up to his energy, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
And if he played loud, sometimes you have to play loud, you know. But his band members knew like what he wanted, you know. So I wouldn't consider. I would have considered myself a basher just because I figured like you just had to, you know, smash the cymbals and play as loud as you could to be impressive. But Elvin always and the other cats, they always had that control. You know, they could bring it down, bring it up, and that brings me to like another thing that I really learned a lot about is listening. I believe, and you know, any musician that's worth their salt, if you will, you have to listen to each other. So, which means that. And that's where dynamics come from. If you're following a soloist and he's starting out like a chorus at a soft volume, then everyone has to come down, you know, because you're supporting the soloist. But, you know, if the soloist, you know, just comes in at the next chorus and he's burning, then, you know, like you're going to have to burn along with him. But keeping in mind that, you know, like you're supporting this soloist, and you're going to match his energy, and, you know, the volume will find its own way. In other words, you know, the volume will match the energy and what's coming out of the soloist, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, I mean, that's what Barry Atchell said. He said that Sam Rivers told him, he's like, I don't need you to play loud necessarily. I just want you to keep the energy up. Keep the energy up.
Exactly.
You know, and like Jackie McLean would say, give me all you got. Give me all you got.
Yeah.
You know, like, and that doesn't mean play louder, play harder. It is based on what is needed. I mean, serving the song. I mean, it's just to serve the song.
Yeah.
If it's a ballad, if it's,
for sure.
You know, and I think that is, Reggie Workman told me that, you know, he could go see younger cats play a 45-minute set of, you know, straight ahead jazz, and the drummers and modern drummers do not touch the cymbals. They've lost. Joe Sample said that a lot of modern, you know, younger drummers have lost, have forgotten or lost the ability to recognize the colors of the cymbals. And I guess to me, one of the magical things about listening to jazz at a certain time is that the bass drum was not that prevalent on recordings. So as a result, you heard a lot of people keeping time on the top of the kit, and they had this incredible way of the bass drum maybe was used for rebound or for accent, but it was not used for keeping heavy time. And I just wanted you to talk a little about, like, especially, let's be clear, I mean, that word fusion, I mean, the first fusion music was Chano Pozzo and Dizzy Gillespie, right? I mean, that was like 45, you know.
Yeah.
So I know what you're talking about. You're talking about like electric blends of blues and jazz and funk and rock. But when did you...
Well, you know... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, how did you discover the beautiful colors? Was there a time in your career, or even before you got to New York, when you recognized that, you just learned to be able to keep time on the top of the kit?
Well, you know, as a new student, I studied with a really good teacher that, he wasn't like he knew what jazz beats sounded like, but he had me read the stuff, and, you know, it goes to like, playing 4/4 on the bass drum, which is more out of the, like the big band era.
Exactly.
I would say. And then this is what I remember reading this article about Kenny Clark, who, from what I understand, because I'm not a historian, that he was like the first cat to kind of take the drum set into the modern era, like
Yep.
into bebop. And, like when he was playing, maybe back in the early 40s and late 30s, there was this method of playing called digging coal, is what he called it. And it was like keeping time on the snare drum, literally. And there was no ride cymbal, really. It was just like accents and such. And then playing bass drum on 4. And he just kind of developed this style of playing where, like you would play time on the ride cymbal, like ding, ding, a ding, ding, a ding, accents on the left hand and lightening up on the bass drum. So basically, I was kind of coming from his, not knowing it, I was coming from his establishment of what modern jazz drumming sounds like to me, and like I don't know, like Philly Joe, Art Blakey, they kind of took that and moved forward. So essentially, I like time on the high. I think I know what you're talking about. Like a lot of
this you. By the way, I know we're all over the place, but this is classic. I mean, I wonder. This is from a guy named Ed Soph.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I don't know him, but I know his history.
So I interviewed him, and this is what he said because what you said is what I believed for a long time about Kenny Clark, Kluk, and this is what he told me in our interview. He said, I would read books how Kenny Clark was the first drummer to quit playing 4 on the floor and use it like he would his left hand to play non-repetitive comping figures. I could never really figure out what he was doing until I met Ed Thigpen. He had seen Kenny Clark live. One day we were talking and he said, one thing that really makes me angry is these guys who write these jazz history books and come out with all these ridiculous statements. The one that kills me is that Kenny Clark revolutionized jazz drumming because he quit playing the bass drum on all 4 beats. Ed said that is absolutely false. He played soft 4 on the floor and accented within that, same way Max Roach did, same way Blakey did. I got some recordings of Tony Williams with Miles where if you have a good amplifier and can switch channels, you can hear him playing soft 4 on the bass drum. So in any event, I like to go listen, the bottom line is this. The other thing is that it was just nuanced. Not everything was mic'd, and everybody was coming up with their own way of playing. So it's just to me, that's why I love going after you cats, because individuality on your instrument and within the group, having a conversation, these are things that, for whatever reasons, and there's a lot of them, have gone away. And I think that it's not even about necessarily keeping time on the kit or 4 on the floor and this and that. It's just I just think that I'd like you to talk to people out there, especially younger cats, about how to find their own individual sound.
Well, here's like it's because of my. What you said, that the statements that you read about Ed Soph and Ed Thigpen, I agree with that. And the reason why I brought up like 4/4 on the 4 on the floor or whatever, what I'm talking about is it was so defined and kind of just overpowered everything else. And to me at the time, it just sounded so unhip. However, realized to actually embarrassed to say not too long ago that what you said about Max Roach and Tony and in particular Philly Joe.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to an interview. I don't know who was interviewing him, but he said that I play 4/4 on the bass drum, but you're not. It's like you were saying. It's very light, and it's just kind of using it as
yeah, it's called
like
feathering. It's called feathering, right?
feathering the bass
Yeah,
drum.
exactly. I love.
Exactly.
It's a lost art, man. I mean, did you learn
Yeah.
When was the first gig before Iowa? Were you already feathering the bass drum?
I was only if it was the blues, because that was my inexperience, and I wasn't hearing everything that Ed Thigpen, who was totally a master and experience. I wasn't hearing it, and I wasn't exposed to it, because had I gone and heard Ed Thigpen play a gig, I would have seen it for myself and heard it for myself, and just I would have had a revelation. Oh man, you can do that, and it sounds as hip as anything else. And I mean, it's gone. It just turned me around, basically, especially when I read what Philly Joe was saying. So to try to answer your question, I really didn't start doing that until maybe 15 years ago, and just playing with it and just realizing what can be done with that, the whole feathering thing. And it also kind of gives me an anchor. And I remember there's some great players out on the West Coast.
I mean, was there, I'm curious, like, up till that point, I mean, that's fine that you started feathering 15 years ago, but even in the fusion bands, I mean, you were just basically using the bass drum. I mean, how were you using the bass drum? Only the reason I say that is I don't think that there's, I think it's a lost art in music today, feathering. And I think that, and I think it's important. I just wanted to know what you were doing up to that point in any context. Could have been with Solstice or any of the jazz stuff. How were you using the bass drum?
Well, all I can tell you is that I was heavily influenced by Lenny White, with Chick Corea.
Oh, my man, dude. I love this. Dear friend of mine, man. Yeah.
Lenny
Dude, the dude is just ridiculous, dude. I mean, the Red Clay with Freddie Hubbard, it's insane.
Yes. That's what we were trying to do. We had original stuff, but it was coming out of that type of fusion. So I mean, I was just doing kind of like an upgraded version of like James Brown.
Dude, do you have tape? I need some tapes of that. Do you have tapes of that stuff?
God, I do have.
We got to get a tape of that. I got to hear what you were playing like, because I mean, it must have been nasty, man. That stuff was because it was like just merging acoustic and electric instrumentation right around that early '70s period.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen, if you heard what Lenny White was doing, in the mid '70s, you could imagine what I was trying to do, and just kind of throwing in some of my old stuff, essence. Maybe not quite as,
well, there's only one Lenny White. I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim, I got another Name That Voice for you. Again, I think you're going to get this one. Take a listen to it, and we'll come back.
Okay.
No. First time I ever even heard about Charlie Parker was '56. He died, and I was in high school. I was coming home in the car with some other hip jazz cats like Joe Hunt. He was a drummer from Richmond, Indiana. And, I mean, these kind of cats, man, they wore the sunglasses at night,
you were wearing sunglasses at night, dude.
Yeah. Well, I saw these guys, they teared up that afternoon. We were coming home from school, going someplace, and I said to them, what happened? And they said, Charlie Parker died today. And the first time I heard a bird. And I knew he had to be something, because these were the heaviest jazz cats I knew. And they were tearing up.
Wow.
All right, Tim Pleasant. Who is that?
Now, is this someone that I had an association?
I believe a much deeper association than the aforementioned Charles McPherson. I believe it was somebody you actually studied with.
Harold Jones?
You got it. Harold Jones.
Harold Jones.
He was 15 years old, driving to strip clubs, playing all night with John Pierce and Joe Hunt. And these guys were older than him. They were wearing sunglasses at night. They were wearing sunglasses at night, and and they teared up when Charlie Parker died. It was the first time you ever heard a bird, dude. Harold, I could not believe you. Can you talk about how you connected with Harold? Because man, I'm going to tell you, man. I mean, he's done his time with Basie. Obviously, he's killing it with Tony Bennett.
Yes.
But man, one of the I got a chance to hang with him at the drum shop in San Rafael. We really connected. I love that cat dearly, man. He could really play his ass off. Talk about how you met him and what you took away from that.
Well, going back to my first year or so of drum lessons in Chicago, I used to go down to Roosevelt University, which is downtown, and my instructor, his name was Ed Farimba. Haven't seen him since I was a teenager. But I walked into lesson one Saturday, and there's this other guy. I didn't know who he was. I mean, of course, I knew of the Basie band and whatever. But he said, "Hi, my name is Harold. I'm subbing for Ed." And it was just like a whole... He was the first cat that really opened my eyes, to like what I need to listen to and, emulate and learn from. Because it was just a whole different approach. And he was all about like just swinging, getting good time, good ideas. I knew who Tony Williams was, but he said, listen to Tony, listen to Philly Joe. Those cats, have it going on. And, he was a godsend, really. I mean, along as I progressed, studying and getting older, I would have, I would have learned, gleaned from just listening to records, but to have someone in front of you telling you, like, this is what you should do, based on what I know, because I know. And, ever since then, I was, listening to as much as I could and playing along with. I would say that most of my education was just listening to records and trying to play with records and just studying what these cats did. But yeah, Harold.
No, I was going to say, because I did 2 interviews with Harold and one in person, and I'll send it all to you. You're going to really love it. But
that would be great.
You're going to have a ball. But he was playing at that time. He was playing with Sun Ra pre-orchestra. He was playing sock hops with straight ahead.
Wow.
Straight ahead.
Wow.
Because we're talking like early 60s or late 50s.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
When you were going to Roosevelt, that was like late 50s?
Well, I would say 60. Okay, I started taking lessons at 15, so that would have been like 1966.
Interesting that he was there. Because he also played, Kennedy came into the White House, and jazz was still America's popular music at that time. And he had all the ambassadors from around the world coming in with their kids, and they asked the kids, what kind of music you want to hear? And they said, we want to hear some jazz music. So there was a kind of an uproar because Paul Winter had just won a Collegiate Jazz Festival award. So they invited his band, which had Richard Evans, who was the most ridiculous bass player from Chicago.
Yeah.
Harold Jones was in that band, Warren Bernhardt. And a lot of people were like, are you kidding me? Where's Louis Armstrong? Where's Dizzy? Where's Duke? How could you not bring those guys? Right. But, it was just Harold was at all these. He's just the sweetest freaking guy. And I cannot believe. The fact that you were touched by him, and the fact that you were, to me, it's almost just like soaking up being in the presence of these people. And I think that that's the hardest part about. For so many people in any genre of music is that all these masters of the music were readily available, completely accessible. And in a lot of ways, a lot of them died broke. It's really a tragedy. Philly Joe was pawning drums off people. It was a tragedy. But, Blakey was hooked on, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
I want to believe, at 42, I sit here sort of trying, and again, it's about promotion, not preservation, but I sort of have this fantasy about what things were. And I realize that if I was actually living through it, it might actually be one of the more depressing things. I almost don't want to leave this fantasy. But that being said,
Yeah.
Harold's one of those guys that through and through knew how to sing for his supper and could really play his ass off.
Oh, yeah.
And I just for you to be able to learn under him is really a blessing.
Now here's just another quick little clip about him is like my brother, who is like 7 years older than me. He was, and my father, partly responsible for me getting to hear like a lot of jazz. And I think my brother was, and I don't know, he was out of the house not out of the house, but he was an adult and he had his own money and he was buying records, a lot of jazz, Art Blakey and Jazz Messenger records, but he also bought this Eddie Harris.
Exodus to Jazz.
Exodus to Jazz.
Yeah, the first million. That record was the first million selling. They sold 1 million records. That was the first record.
Wow.
That went.
Yeah.
Went,
wow.
Yeah, that Harold was on that. That was great.
Yeah. Well, I was intimately, familiar with that recording before I met Harold.
Yes.
And then when he said I'm Harold Jones and then, like drums, and then I kind of put two and two together and oh man, you're on Eddie Harris's, and then that was like mind blowing to me. And just like a kid, knows nothing from nothing. All of a sudden he's in front of like a great drummer. I just totally blew my mind. And I mean, honestly, I never saw him again. To this day, I have not seen him except for maybe a couple of appearances on television, which I saw actually on YouTube, with Tony Bennett and all.
Well, I'm gonna give you his phone number. You should give him a call. He's the man.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you his number because the guy is freaking. He's gold.
Where does he live now?
I think he's out in Mill Valley. He's out in Marin County.
Mill Valley, California. Oh,
yeah, I'll give you his number.
Okay.
He is the greatest freaking dude. I wanted you to just, from your own perspective, just talk about your concept of the music. I hate labels. I mean, I people call it jazz, but if we walk down the street and ask 20 people what their definition of jazz is, you get 20 different answers. I just wonder about if you could talk about the sharing and the community of it, because all these guys that I never met, they were tough people, but they also, all they wanted to do was pass along the knowledge. They wanted to share the knowledge. They wanted to pass along the information to keep growing the music. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were getting ahead in their lives. They could play live. They could be in the studios. Not all of them. Some of them got ripped off, but they were not hoarding. We have a hoarding problem. We have a greed factor problem today in our society, and it's directly reflected in the music. Yeah. And I just wanted you to talk about why it's okay to share knowledge, especially as it relates to music. And because without it, I don't know how it's supposed to continue.
Well, I think it's all about sharing knowledge, because that's how younger guys are going to learn. Like if I am I'll kind of give you like a real world example. I've never really taught much throughout the years, but I have been asked to give a few lessons here and there, blah, blah, blah. Within the last couple of years, I live in the desert in California, so Palm Springs.
Mm-hmm.
So about 50 miles from here is a great arts high school in a town called Idlewild. It's called Idlewild Arts. And it's essentially like going to college as a high school student, basically. I mean, they have majors like classical music major, jazz major, art majors, photography and such. But I was recruited by a friend to just give like lessons to 3 students. And my whole approach was just to kind of give them a foundation of how it is to swing, but also like just giving them, you know, link after link, record after record of all the jazz greats, you know, from, you know, the 50s and so on, just to kind of give them an eye. This is what jazz is, you know, like this is what you should aspire to be. So when I was teaching them, I was just trying to pass on like universal knowledge of how it is to swing, you know, different styles within the jazz, thin jazz, whether it's like straight ahead bebop or, you know, kind of more esoteric, if you will, post bop kind of concepts and stuff. And I don't know, it's just you can't be greedy because it just doesn't do the music world any good.
Let me ask you something though, because I don't know. I just released this interview I did with. I think one of the magical parts of my show is just the idea that I've been able to leapfrog over the boomers and kind of get into beatniks and or people that predated what people think. Like everybody thinks that Sly Stone created funk music, but actually it was a guy named Johnny Talbot and the Thangs. Were you hip to Johnny Talbot and the Thangs?
Oh, it's a new one on me. I'm going to have to check it out.
So he said, this is what I was just transcribing the interview. He's been ripped off countless times. He said, because, you know, he was in Oakland in the early 60s and outside of Dyke and the Blazers and Jimmy McCracklin, I mean, Sly was nowhere to be on the map. And this is what he said. He goes, the Montgomery brothers, because, I mean, Wes had a room at the Booker T. Washington Hotel in San Francisco. And he said the Montgomery brothers were playing jazz. They couldn't hang with blues musicians. You can make a blues musician a jazz musician, but you can't make a jazz musician a blues musician. Jazz comes out of the blues. It doesn't go the opposite way. If you tried to make a little white boy from Walnut Creek play country western, that would be hard for him too. That music was born out of a lot of patience and plowing fields, and anybody who didn't do that can't play the blues. You can go from the bottom up, but it's hard to come down. And I guess that's the other part is if a lot of people think that, you know, they're going to start at you know, kind of blue or a Love Supreme, they have to go back farther because the jazz.
Yeah.
I wanted you. I mean, a lot of people I think would scoff at something like that. Johnny Talbot was the grandmaster of funk, and he basically said Sly got on the Ed Sullivan Show because he integrated his band and he softened up the lyrics in his music. Okay, so it wasn't as raunchy. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, can you talk about your experience, even if you didn't play a lot of blues gigs, the idea that blues is the foundation of it all? And I think if cats don't go back far enough we still have a lot of issues in our society as it relates to, you know, integration and racism and plenty of stuff. We can't exactly go back to the plantations. Nobody's... Thankfully, sharecroppers or plowing fields or things like that. But I mean, you have to live the blues in order to play it. And, or to a degree, you have to be able to play the blues before you play jazz. And I just wanted you to talk about your foundation in the blues because when I hear modern jazz today, I hear a lot of technical, a lot of facility, a lot of technique, and sophistication, and I wind up staring at the wall because I don't get any feeling out of it. I don't feel the blues. I don't hear it. I don't feel it. And I wanted you to talk about how you know, maybe even subconsciously how you merged. I mean, Chicago was, I mean, Phil Upchurch told me, you know, he'd go down to Market Street and, you know, like freaking all the blind dobro players were playing down there. And I mean, it's just like, you know, it's just like, it was blues. It was, people were singing the blues. I just wanted you to talk about how you have been able to integrate that into however intellectualized the music got. If it doesn't have the blues, you can't feel it, you know?
Yeah, well, it's like it's an earthy thing. You know, it's like you were saying. If you start with kind of blue and go from there up, you know, it's you're missing a lot.
Yeah.
I just because of my situation, I really never got a chance to check out a lot of what was going on in Chicago, just by virtue of either my age or not being able to get around or hang, you know, with, you know, different cats. For me, I kind of started, you know, like kind of in the middle and then moved up from there. You know, started with maybe Blakey, and then kind of skipping to Tony and going up from there. But when I got to New York, I realized how much I missed. Like even playing with, you know, some blues players, just having fun, I realized, man, I haven't done much of this. And it's kind of, I know what the blues is and I know who B.B. King is, but at the same time, I really don't. And, you know, not necessarily having to live, you know, in the Mississippi Delta, you know, to get the feel. But I agree with you. You can kind of glean as much as you can, but, you know, if you, I don't know, there's value in going back as far as you can to capture an essence, listening to, you know, like the old, you know, masters, Muddy Waters. I can't remember a lot of the cats.
Yeah, John Lee Hooker. I mean, all the, you know, it's like
John Lee Hooker.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's my question is, you know, not that you've given it a lot of thought, but just because I was transcribing this interview with Johnny Talbot, and he's talking about it's easy to go from the bottom up, starting with blues.
Yes.
But
exactly.
it's hard to go from the top down. And I think that if you get all intellectual about the music, which is what's happened to jazz music in the last half century, then if there's no blues in it, it's just going to become some sort of intellectual exercise. You know, I mean, I think it's really. So even though you maybe, I mean, just the idea of the ability to play, I mean, that's the point, is that even all the Sonny Rollins, Alan Toussaint, John Coltrane, Charlie Neville, Cannonball Adderley, all those guys walked the bar, you know. I mean, I know they were older than you, but they were all in R&B bands. Even though they didn't love it was not that sophisticated, they knew, they played the blues. They knew the blues. They'd play honky-tonk bars with cowboys, with guns, you know, and walk. I mean, and then they played bebop, and then they got into bebop. Okay, so then, you know, they were rooted in that rhythm and blues before they got into the sophistication. But can you just talk about? Do you agree with him? Like, you can go from the bottom up, but
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Because, like, you know, blues is the foundation, and if you are grounded in the blues, you know, like you start sprouting, you know, like the creative sprouts start to come out of
it's like a lotus flower, you know? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yeah. And speaking for myself, I just hadn't. So the best I can do, or I would say anyone could do, is just to go back to it. You know, you're probably not going to live it, but go back and listen. You know, a lot of times when I hear, like, you know, these you know, the John Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters and you know, this person and that person, it's very, to the untrained ear, it may sound raw. That's the thing. It's raw.
It's raw.
It's got emotion.
Exactly.
It's raw and it's got emotion, and that emotion is, you know, is a big part of it. And I think, like you were alluding to, with a lot of the modern players, are just what's happening now. There's a lot of emotion that's missing. It's like technique, and, you know, what I can do with the time signature and how slick I can be, but sometimes the emotion is not there. You know, just playing with like a singer. I can't remember this woman's name. I did a gig with her. She was from Chicago, and she may have been a little bit older than me, but I think she grew up around that more than I did. And when I got a chance to play with her, I was hearing like the emotion and just tearing your heart out, that kind of thing. Which,
I mean, even you listen to Love Supreme all the way through. It's like it's burning emotional music. It's the blues. I mean, it's an anguished cry for world peace, whatever it is. I think it also has to do with no disrespect to them. I mean, they were just born into it. But if you're going to Berkeley, or I mean, every school has codified. Everyone's going to the academy now. If you're able to pay or go on a scholarship to a school for $50,000 a year to play music, you're not really living the blues. I mean, you're not.
Well, that's it. I actually had this discussion with a buddy of mine who my wife and I had a dinner with his wife. He's from Kentucky, but he's a drummer. He's not a full-time musician.
Sure. Yeah.
But we were talking about jazz schools and this and that, and then he brought up the fact that Chick Corea had a half a year studies at some school. I don't know.
He went to Eddie Gomez said that Chick went to Juilliard, didn't like the teacher, and left. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I told him, listen, you, as everyone knows, you don't have to go to Berkeley or Juilliard or USC to play jazz,
right.
So, that's what they do, and it can be good, and it may not be so good. I just can't imagine paying $50,000 a year, to get a degree in jazz, and then hopefully if you're talented enough.
But it's can I ask you, going back to Iowa, I mean, I know that you were playing out live. I mean, the idea of learning in the academy was very different when you were going there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you were out on the band,
Yeah, well, my buddy, John Tinney, guitar player who is from Iowa City, and we hooked up. He was a music student. There was no jazz program at Iowa.
Exactly. You can't exactly. There's no. Yeah. You can't teach. You can't go to school for jazz. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, anyway, I really didn't know what else to do, so I played drums, and I figured, I'll study music or whatever it is to get a degree, and then go teach high school band or something. But my learning was, like you said, on the bandstand. I mean, we always found little bars and, outdoor venues to just play out, whether we're trying to do a blues thing or like a funky thing or just, crazy far out jazz or what.
I love it.
That's where, that's how I learned, Even learning with someone that's as inexperienced as you are is still learning, because that other person is listening to stuff that maybe I wasn't listening to, and he's laying it out and dancing. So I don't know, there's value for sure, like, studies in college and such.
Let me ask you. We're gonna have to do set 2 soon, but I wanted to ask you. It's been very different. I mean, just the ability to have live spiritual communal music of any kind has just not happened during the pandemic. And I wonder if you feel, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball, but does your instinct and intuition tell you not that music won't be appreciated? Of course, it always is appreciated, but do you believe it will take on an added significance and be seen as a real profession coming out of probably the darkest time that definitely in my lifetime? I mean, do you feel that if once we get back to some kind of normalcy, that musicians might again be treated like professionals the way Dizzy was? I mean, listen, Dizzy and Miles, Train, they weren't millionaires, but you know what? They lived okay. They did okay. They were considered geniuses. And again, they made a lot of money overseas. But that being said, What do you believe? What is your? I don't even want to know what your hope is. What does your gut tell you about? Because I believe that prior to coronavirus, Cats had opportunities to play. They could tour, but they barely were getting. They were barely making it. They were not being compensated for it. What does your gut tell you about coming out of this thing?
My gut changes. In fact, it was a low gut. Like after my last gig was on March the 15th, and it wasn't a straight edge. It was just a gig,
Sure.
like playing at a restaurant, playing tunes, and just having fun. And then when this whole thing came down, there was hope that things were going to bounce back, which it didn't. And then basically I was kind of pessimistic because I'm thinking, like, once this thing does lighten up and music starts to come back, it's going to come back in stages. It's going to be a solo artist. I understand what's happening with restaurants and music venues, like they're just losing money. So they don't have the money. Once things start to open up again, they're going to have to kind of build. But for myself, I was thinking, well, it's probably going to be a solo piano or guitar player, and then maybe like a couple of months later, they're going to add a bass player.
Exactly.
And
yeah, exactly. Like a tiered thing. Yeah.
Right. By the time they get to a whole band, it's going to be maybe like 80 years old. But I don't know. My feeling is changing.
I did.
Because I around town, I'm running into like the local people that have their businesses, and they're talking about, we want to get back. We want to get back to having music again. But in terms of, whether there's going to be more respect for the jazz community, I don't know. I would hope so, but I think, jazz has always been from my experience, like an art form that you were saying was greatly underappreciated in this country. And I just tend to believe that it's really not going to change things. Maybe in some respects, just because people have not been able to go out and hear live music or whatever.
You know what I meant? What I really meant was not so much, because I agree with you. What I meant was because of the suffering and the trauma, that there'll be some blues injected into the music again, like we've never heard.
The emotion.
Yeah, the emotion.
Well,
yeah.
I believe so. And I can basically cite an example. It's a small example, but not being able to play gigs, I have been kind of going, like to different locations where friends gather and play jam sessions. And I can tell, because of not being able to play out, and not being able to play with their friends, that there's just a whole kind of breath of fresh air, I think. Like, it's just like we have this opportunity. We're gathered together in this room. We may not be able to do a gig next week, but let's take advantage of this moment. And I think, speaking for myself, but I'm kind of like in a headspace where I really want to create. I'm not trying to force anything, but I think my appreciation, getting together with like-minded musicians wanting to create, is just creating like kind of a higher level, I guess.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I feel like the creator, as Pharoah Sanders says, the creator has a master plan, and I'm not Pollyannish about. I mean, it'll always be hard. It's never been easy being a creative musician, and in this day and age, it's really pretty depressing, because there are people especially at the pop level, having huge success within the music industry, and they couldn't play live if their life depended on it. The technology has surpassed humanity, so there's issues. But I just think that, to catch a fire, to feel that fire in the belly, not just the angst of not being able to play at all, but, recognizing that, I used to not understand when people would say to me, well, I play every gig like it's a matter of life and death, or it's, you know, and I didn't know what that meant, but now I do.
Yeah.
Because a lot of,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, you know, I mean, I'm thankful, and I hope to see you on the bandstand really soon. I'll come out to Palm Springs. I live in Tucson, so I mean, but
Oh yeah.
but you know, like, you know, I guess, you know, there's no, we don't have the crystal ball. To me, the lack of authenticity in music, the amount of mechanization of music today, it's very disturbing. It's conforming to a degree that is not what music to me is about. Music is about complete liberation and freedom with the rudiments, but at the same time, that people would come back on the bandstand and totally be themselves and totally play with, you know, and that would be my hope, you know, and hopefully they could walk away and maybe get ahead, because it's hard. It's hard in this business.
Yes, I think, you know, like in our lifetime, you know, for me, this is the first event, you know, like worldwide event that just shut me down, basically, and everyone else. And with us experiencing that, I believe that that's something that's, you know, in the back of everyone's mind. And it's like you were saying, whoever made that statement, like, I'm going to play every gig, like, you know,
it's a matter of life and death. Yeah.
Matter of life and death, because you never know what's going to come down the line. And now we kind of got a taste of it. You know, there's things that I'm thinking about now that I just, for instance, I would like to do a recording of my own. I mean, I've been on other people's recordings and such, but, you know, I just kind of always considered myself a side man, blah, blah, blah. But now, you know, I want to do stuff, you know.
Yeah, Tim Pleasant, band leader, as a leader, definitely.
Well, you know, I have ideas, but, like, you know, like, who knows? I better do it now or soon, because
you know what it is. I mean, there's just this. The point is that here's the bottom line, man. Like, there is a void, but the void presents an opportunity for you to be as proactive as you want. And to me, like, when you have this open palette, you know, you know, so, but it is interesting. I mean, it literally has ground to a halt, and, you know, slowly but surely, you know, they're opening up big venues, like 15% capacity. It's strange. It's going to be different, but maybe, I can only hope that there will be rebirth and regeneration and a continued growth in the blues and the music that we love. So, I mean, Tim Pleasant, we will pick this conversation up. I'm so psyched that Aaron connected us, man. It was really an honor to hang with you, man.
Yeah, Aaron is he's an inspiration, you know, like,
dude, the greatest cat, man.
Yeah, just all the stuff. I mean, not only is he a great drummer, but I mean, he knows a lot about the business and just has a sense of what you were talking about, like the music, you know, from an organic sense as opposed to, like, you know, just mechanicalized and such. So he's a great cat.
Dude, he's the ultimate punk rocker, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I hope it wasn't all over the place, but
that's what you know, I mean, everybody, the bottom line is this: if you had fun and you don't remember what you talked about, then I'm doing my job, you know, because that was a great hang. We covered a lot of ground.
Oh man, appreciate it. I appreciate Harold's number too. You know.
Yeah, I'm gonna hook this. I'm gonna deluge you with interviews, and Harold, you got to call Harold, man. He will be tickled to death. I love that cat.
Yeah. I can't wait.
Yeah. Much love to you, man. Be safe. Looking forward to catching you live in the not too distant future.
All right, Jake. Appreciate it.
Be cool, man.
Take it easy.
Later.
Bye.
Bye. Tim Pleasant, great drummer, great cat, has been around the block, as we all have, and as we continue to plow forward through this unprecedented time. Big thanks to Aaron Spursky for that connection, looking to inspire at all costs. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.